Hi everybody, this is going to be a video that I'm going to call Your House is on Fire. And what do I mean by that? Basically, I mean your house is on fire and you have 5 minutes to grab 10 albums out of your collection to save from your entire collection. Now it's similar to a Desert Island Disc list, other than the fact that with Desert Island Disc, you've got some time to prepare, you've got some time to really ruminate on what albums would I really pick out of my entire collection. You can only pick 10, that's all the time you have to grab. Now, you might say, well, I would just go in and I'd grab an armful of albums or CDs. Well, if you're anything like me, everything that I have is alphabetized. So if I were to do that, I would grab most likely, 2 or 3 letters of the alphabet rather than kind of a majority of my collection. And so that's why I wanted to make it, not only is it, you're picking very impulsively your top 10 albums, and maybe they're not your top 10 albums, but just 10 albums that you can't do without, that you gotta have, but you only have 5 minutes. That's all the time I allotted myself to pick my 10 albums. So it's something that's, very impulsive. If I were to do this exercise tomorrow or in a week, this list may be different. But again, I didn't give it too much thought. I just said, okay, I'm going to do this right now, and I've only got 5 minutes. So I'm going to show you the 10 albums from my collection that I picked. And they're on CD, just because it's a little easier to manage during the video, to be able to show and talk about. Could have picked albums, but I did not. So going to start off with the first album that I would pick. It's going to go with the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. Love this album. This might be my favorite Rolling Stones album. Put a gun to my head, I'm going to say Let It Bleed for sure. Classic rock anthems on here with Gimme Shelter, You Can't Always Get What You Want. I love Monkey Man, I love Midnight Rambler, I love the title track, Let It Bleed, just so great. So many of my favorite Rolling Stone moments are on this album. It's their final album of the 60s. Kind of a fitting way to close out what was a very tumultuous decade for the Rolling Stones. Their first album without Brian Jones as an active member of the band and an active participant. Something, I grew up with this album. My dad had this album, so there's just something about the artwork too that I just love. So gonna go with Let It Bleed as my first choice. Second choice is gonna be Led Zeppelin, their first album. One of the reasons is I cannot do without Dazed and Confused, one of my favorite Led Zeppelin tracks. Also, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. Such a great moody rocker. I know it's a Joan Baez cover, but Led Zeppelin just make it their own. Just a fantastic collection of songs here. Black Mountain Side, Straight Into Communication, Breakdown, the fantastic drumming of John Bonham on Good Times, Bad Times. So many great Led Zeppelin albums, but today I just felt like I couldn't do without their first classic album. Reminds me a lot of my college days when I was getting into Led Zeppelin. That was one of the first albums that I owned by them, and so I've kind of got a soft spot for that. Now, I knew I wanted to have some jazz with me in my collection, my 10 discs, I should say. And of course, what better to pick than some Miles Davis? Now, Kind of Blue would have been the safe choice, the easy choice, but I've always felt like Round About Midnight has never gotten the acclaim that it deserves. Also, some late 50s Miles Davis, but when most people pick out a classic Miles Davis album, they go with Kind of Blue. I'm gonna sit here right now and stand up for this album. I love this album. It's got everything that I love about Kind of Blue and a little bit more. Round Midnight is great. Alu Cha, All of You is great. Love Dear Old Stockholm. Two Bass Hit is fantastic. Just some great tracks. And I've heard Kind of Blue so many times, time and time again, but this one I never get tired of listening to. And it always invariably, if I'm going to listen to one Miles Davis album, if I'm just kind of late at night looking to throw some jazz on, more often than not, it's going to be that album. Next one I'm going to pick is Radiohead, my favorite album of the 90s, my favorite Radiohead album. Just love this from not only progressive rock, alternative rock, concept album standpoint, but just just a fantastic collection of songs. Airbag, one of my favorite songs of all time. Paranoid Android is great. Subterranean Homesick Alien is awesome. Karma Police is great. Just love this album from start to finish. If you haven't checked it out yet, if you're a fan of great melodic rock, a concept album, it reminds me a little bit of Pink Floyd, either Wish You Were Here or Dark Side of the Moon. Just a great, great, great solid album. Now, I also limited myself to one album per artist because I could have just grabbed a stack of Beatles albums and called it a day. However, if I could only pick one Beatle album, it would be the White Album. Yes, it's a double album. Yes, it's one of their most eclectic albums. You know, there's definitely some kind of off-the-wall filler tracks in here. Why Don't We Do It on the Road and Wild Honey Pie and you know, some of the other kind of, you know, real short and inconsequential songs crop up on here. But so many fantastic tracks. I love Glass Onion. Wouldn't want to do without that song. I love Happiness is a Warm Gun. I love Birthday, Your Blues, Revolution 1, Savoy Truffle. Some great George Harrison tracks on here. Long, Long, Long. Even Piggies, I think, is a charming, fantastic song. So, gonna go with the White Album. Always had a soft spot in my heart for White Album. So, that is my Beatles. Now, of course, you know me, I got to pick the Beach Boys. And again, the safe choice would have been to go with Pet Sounds. However, I'm gonna go with Friends. And maybe I'm cheating a little bit because it also has 2020 on here, which I think the two albums complement each other great. I love Friends a lot more than I do 2020, but 2020 is nothing to sneeze at either. So just love Friends. Just such a laid back, for the times especially, you know, 1968 was just such a time of turmoil, and there was a Vietnam going on, the civil rights strife. You had Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated that year. It was just a very, you know, very stressful and violent and tumultuous year. And yet the Beach Boys put out what is probably their most relaxing, their most warm, down-to-earth collection of songs. Just can't say enough about all the tracks on here. Meant for You is just a great, brief album opener. Friends has some of the Beach Boys' best harmonies. Wake the World is great. You've got Passing By, which is kind of a charming little slice of 60s instrumental kitsch. Maybe one of my favorite instrumentals of all time, not just the Beach Boys, but maybe all-time instrumentals, is Diamond Head. Just a fantastic, soothing, just evokes the whole sitting on the beach at sunset. Great, great track. And this is a great, great album. If you only know the Beach Boys from their early 60s work, or maybe just their greatest hits or Pet Sounds, definitely pick this one up because you will be pleasantly surprised. And don't let its anonymity or the fact that it's kind of one of the lesser known Beach Boys albums, don't let it fool you. This is a great, great album. Gotta go with some progressive rock, and my favorite progressive rock album of all time is Close to the Edge by Yes. Just the opening Close to the Edge suite is just from start to finish fantastic. It's breathtaking, the instrumentation, just the whole, yes, everything that was great about Yes, just the way that they all, you know, it's the sum of just such fantastic parts is on display here on that title track. Especially the whole I Get Up, I Get Down, you know, that just gives me goosebumps every time I listen to that. You know, the church organ, just the harmonies, just everything about that track. And it's a real long track. It is almost 19 minutes long, and yet it goes by so fast, and I enjoy it so much. Also, you know, it's not enough just to have that on here. They've got You and I, and also Siberian Katru, if that's how you pronounce it. But just a solid, solid album. Everything that I love about Yes, never, ever. I could listen to this 20 times in a row and still not get sick of it. Just a great album. Another one of my favorite albums of all time that maybe is, or most people maybe have not heard of, is Jeff Buckley's Grace. This is the deluxe edition of it. But Jeff Buckley, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he put this album out in 1994, and he tragically passed away in 1997. But what he left us with, only one studio album, but it is amazing from start to finish. Just his voice, his songwriting, his guitar playing, just everything about this. He's got a voice like, I think one writer described it as an oversexed Robert Plant. Just amazing. If you've ever heard any Jeff Buckley song, it was probably Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen cover. His version of that is just far and away not only the greatest cover of a Leonard Cohen song to my way of thinking and to my ears, but maybe one of the greatest covers of all time. Just so much emotion, so much melody, just so much raw power and energy and emotion and passion in this one studio album. It was you know, I know I said Radiohead was my favorite album of the 90s, OK Computer, but, you know, it is in a close tie with Jeff Buckley's Grace. One of my favorite albums of the 70s, Who's Next? I love The Who, and this is probably my favorite Who album next to Quadrophenia and Tommy. Can't say enough again about this one. You've got the timeless rock anthems, Baba O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, Behind Blue Eyes. I mean, every song off here is just a bona fide classic. One of John Entwistle's best songs, My Wife. You got Bargain. The Song Is Over, Getting in Tune. Just not a weak moment on this album. I know you've heard it, so you either love it or you like it a lot. There's no hating on this album whatsoever. So gotta grab this because I just could not do, and my favorite song, my favorite Who songs probably bookend this album. So gotta go with Who's Next. And I think I'm down to my very last one, and this is probably going to surprise you because I don't talk a lot about my love for 80s new wave or alternative, but this next album will always be in my top 10, and it probably has a lot to do with nostalgia and what was going on in my life at my time and at that time. But when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad passed away after a long illness, and during that illness, one of the albums that I listened to over and over again, and you talk about like an album that gets you through a rough period, an album that you kind of turn to again and again to kind of lift you up and just sort of, you know, take your mind off of what's going on at the time. And for me, that is Tears for Fears' Song from the Big Chair. One of my favorite all-time songs is Head Over Heels, but just this album was such a departure from their first album, which was very much kind of 80s synth pop, new wave. I mean, it had an edge to it, but this just kind of came out of left field. It was so mature. It was just so much more dense, more instrumentation, just more eclectic than their first album was. Shout is a great track. The Working Hour, I love the heck out of that. Everybody Wants to Rule the World was another one of the singles. Mother's Talk was another single. And then the very moody second side with I Believe, and then Broken, straight into Head Over Heels, and then back into the Broken reprise. And then Listen, which is just a great moody close to the album. Just love the heck out of this. And I've always been a big Tears for Fears fan, but this definitely for me one of my favorite, if not my favorite 80s album of all time. Don't laugh, don't judge me, but I'm sticking by it. So that is my 10 discs that I just grabbed 5 minutes for my collection, and the ones that I would run out of my burning house clutching under my arms. So curious what your top 10 would be, or at least 10 albums that you would pick in 5 minutes. And maybe that's something fun to do with your collection. If you could only grab 10 albums, you got about 5 minutes to get out of your house with those albums, what would they be? Thanks for watching, thanks for liking, and thanks for subscribing, and take care.